This is the first roundtable for the Screenplay Challenge, and this is just between the mods. So this is Screaming Vegetable, Astro Slop, Brute versus the Fool, and Disco, and we have real names, and you can see them. And so we're gonna jump into this. This is mostly about if you're a new writer, or you're a writer at the start of a contest. How do you start writing a screenplay? How do you jump into a completely new world when you've just learned what your subject or your condition is like an hour ago? So this is basically about that first week in the 6-week process of writing a screenplay for one of our contests. But I guess we're going to start off with the contest in general and how it gets started, because most of us started relatively early. I mean, Astro, you were 2018, correct?
Yeah, in 2018.
Yeah, the rest of us were 2017 when we started. So Disco, you started the contest. So I guess talk about the origins of how everything started and how, we are where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was 2017. I think I had just started a new job at the time, but I'd been out of work for a bit. And I had a real problem with procrastination. I wanted to be a writer, but I just had never, I had written stuff in the past. I'd written screenplays and I'd written short stories, but I just wasn't making the progress that I wanted to make on my goals. And so the contest, it was something that I made that initial post for it just kind of to motivate myself to actually get something done. Because I knew if, I was part of a contest, I'm going to have that outside pressure motivating me to actually write something. Whereas I was having a lot of trouble motivating myself at the time. So I didn't really have an idea for the contest as it is now. That's something like, you guys and the whole community came together and came up with. But my idea at the time is I was thinking, I'll post online. I'll see if, there's like maybe 2 or 3 other people that want to compete, and we all write scripts. And, at the end of the day, maybe we post them and we see who did the best one or something like that. And I had the subject condition idea, but that was about it. I didn't know anything about the time frame. I wasn't even picturing this as an actual contest or community. And so when I posted that initial post on the Reddit our horror board, because I knew horror fans are usually very passionate, and it kind of just took on a life of its own. So you jumped in very quickly, Ben, right from the start. And I remember you were coming at me with all these ideas. You were asking me, who's judging the contest and what's the time frame? And I had no clue. Like, I was going out of my mind. And you jumped in there like right at the beginning too, Tom. And I remember, I think when I was going back and looking over the initial posts, so what I remember, like, I think you had the idea for it to be 6 weeks. Don't quote me on that.
Right. But well, I can tell you for a fact, I don't remember anything about anything, so I will believe you.
It's funny when I mentioned his script from that first contest. I'm like, it's so good, man. He's like, I don't remember what that was. So it is weird remembering kind of that early period of the contest, because we all seem like such amateurs in kind of retrospect. That my script for that contest was 135 pages or something, but it wasn't. It was just formatted so horribly, and it was actually like 100 pages. So all the feedback for it was just like, the script's too long, you got to cut it down. And it's just because they saw a script page number. They didn't actually, read it. That it's formatted that badly that it was an extra 30 pages or so, just based on that. But I mean, like, for the most part, the community was able to see through that and say, like, you're just an amateur writer, you didn't know anything about screenwriting and how to format a screenplay. So no wonder your formatting is so terrible. And the point is, you have a story. It has no commas, but that doesn't really matter. You have a story, and maybe you'll fix that eventually, which I did. And that's anybody who writes their first screenplay and it's just not formatted right, or the flow is a little off. It's written like a book, that's the point of the contest. You have people reach it afterwards. They read the screenplay and say, hey, this is more like a book. This is the formatting's wrong. You could cut this out, and that is why, as an amateur, it's actually good to get ripped apart, when you join
definitely.
a community like this, because the story remains, the general idea of your horror story remains, and people will tell you you can get scared regardless of formatting, like if the formatting is terrible, it's still, the idea is scary, and it can be saved, by teaching the person how to use commas. So that's anybody who says, I've never written a screenplay before, and that was a lot of people in that first contest, myself included. It's just, you just say, go ahead and write it. You're going to learn a lot whenever you do this, and you're most likely going to look back on it in a couple of years and say, I'm not happy with the way I wrote that, but I am happy I wrote it. So that was really starting the contest. There was a lot of that, and I think it helped everyone who joined at that point become a better writer.
I agree, because I think my first script was Rouse Him Not, and I think that was I was basically like, hey, if there was a sequel to The Exorcist, this is how I looked at it. Because if you look at The Exorcist combined Catholic imagery, iconography with the Babylonian. And if you looked at the actual Babylonian myths, Pazuzu was a figure that could either be benevolent or evil, but his sister was consistently worse and she ate children. And I was like, oh, why didn't we talk about that? And so I constructed this script that was basically a love letter to horror, and every bit of it was an Easter egg, the street names and the people. And I had like scenes that were like there was a point where they were the doctors from Reanimator who were clearly doing something in the basement. And it was all this stuff I wanted people to catch. And it was literally everything that you're not supposed to emphasize as a writer is what I did. I made every mistake that an amateur writer would make on a script. So yeah, there's been a lot of growth since then.
First scripts, I don't criticize character names in first scripts, because it's funny whenever you look at someone's first script and you're like, I wonder if they're going to reference Scream, because it's like, I remember I saw one of the questions in the subreddit was, what screenplay inspired you to like become a screenwriter? And I'm sure most of us, like a lot of horror writers, saw Scream whenever we were like 15 or something, and it said like, oh, now there's a horror screenplay. And you'll see a lot of people that like in their own works, they'll like name someone Sydney, or like there's just some slight reference to Scream or something. And like that's, for anyone's first screenplay, it's very hard to like, you're writing because you love films, and because you love films, you want to reference those films.
Yep.
So as a result, you're going to name a character. The script that won that first contest, we had a judge. The name was Nocturnal Playground. It was vampires, but they lived on like Stoker Lake. The main character's name was Mina. Everyone's name was Dracula. And I don't mean to dunk on this guy's script, but I thought like, that's interesting, because I was like, oh, he's just obviously clearly drawing from Dracula for this. But the funny thing to me was the main character, when she realizes she's living with vampires next door, she goes and like goes to a library and gets Dracula to read it. And I was like, wait a minute, you have to wonder why your name is Mina and you live on Stoker Lake and your boyfriend's name was Jonathan Harker. And, so it's very interesting when you see how a horror writer's mind in their first story builds around what they love, and that's what inspired them to write the screenplay in the first place.
Yeah, I killed my lead in like the first 15 pages. Like I did a bunch of stuff where you're like, oh boy. So
what I liked about your script, and that was, so I really liked your script whenever I read it, because it was very unlike other Hollywood scripts, and that's whenever I realized this contest had potential. So what happens in your script is your gods come down to wreak havoc on Earth, and normally this is whenever it would just be bye humans, but the army actually puts up a fight. Like they do some decent damage to your gods when they're like, I think they're in a hospital or something.
Right.
And I was just thinking, like, I've never seen that before, where the elder being has come down expecting Earth to be theirs, and it's like, hey, here's a gun, this is new. And it's just, it causes a big problem.
Things have changed since Babylon, bro. There's no more spears.
So that was I thought like, I've never seen something like that before. And I'm sure, like going through the Hollywood process, there'd be some idiot producer who's just like, well, what if we did, more cliche, and like, even though I could see where your influences were, like with The Exorcist and stuff, that you were able to break away from that and tell a unique story that had that action climax that I hadn't seen before. And that was what was interesting about the contest to me, was seeing unique voices that I'm not going to see normally, and unique voices that are unrefined. Like I said, that first screenplay is a little rough that I did because of all the comments and formatting, but like Disco said he really liked it because it's the only pure horror story I've ever written. Every other contest script I've written has been like horror action or some other type of, psychological mixed with something else. And that one is just a pure, scary, typical horror script. And because I learned after that, I was like, I want to explore more genres, and I would explore, different types of storytelling I would like. And it was never pure horror again. It was able to cross genres.
Awesome.
But I had to write horror first. Yeah.
I was all right. Anybody else remember their first script
ever written in our like?
Oh no, for the sub.
Yeah, that first script was Method. That was about a method actor in Hamlet who went insane because he thought he was Hamlet, and there's more twists and turns to why he thinks he's Hamlet.
Right. No, I remember that. Yeah, that was pure. You're right. That is the most pure horror you've written.
Yeah, and it's because I had to basically, like, I couldn't write horror action at that point because I'd never written actual horror. I had to, teach myself basically the best, I had to start from square one, which was every script I've written after that. Like, I had a period where the budgets for the screenplays I wrote were just going up because, yeah. And so that first one is basically like two locations. There's a theater and there's a hotel, and that's basically where everything takes place. And it's relatively low budget. It could easily be like a Blumhouse tier budget film. And then after that, immediately after that, was the history contest, which both of our scripts would be huge budgets for that one. Because we had like you had a war film, I had a gold rush film in the 1800s. And when we covered a lot of ground, it's because we had written, our pure horror scripts, and we were like, well, let's see what we can do now. And that's what's most interesting, that any writer who's like their first script, they're going to give it to you and say, what do you think? And it's fine to say, it's a little rough, but I just watched the John Cassavetes film Shadows today, which was his first film. And I'd never seen any of his films before. And it was super interesting because it was obviously made for 2 nickels and, just black coffee. And there's just so much promise in the film. It's very messy. You can tell that basically everyone on it had never worked in a film before. But when I finished watching it, I was like, it was an okay movie, but I want to see what this guy's going to do next. And he does great things. He becomes like one of the great directors of the 70s. It's because in the 50s, he had to find his voice.
I was talking to somebody that wants to work on like superhero films and large scale films. And I was trying to explain to them how many people that you're seeing working for Marvel and DC films that came from genre entertainment. They were guys that wrote small horror films. James Gunn, how many small horror films did he do? Scott Derrickson, even James Wan, Insidious runs out of money part of the way through, and they finish it with a high school cast doing the makeup and it sets, they're coming from a background like ours, and it's just a great launching point to be able to, how can I cheaply do this and improvise and grow from here? So, yeah.
Asher, you want to talk about your first script?
Yeah, sure. I first stumbled upon this. I didn't really spend much time on Reddit, but I was on R Horror. I had posted a couple things there, and just kind of killing time a lot of the time. And I found the contest at the 2018 annual, and I got my assignments. I was like, oh, I could definitely write something, and then promptly forgot about it for 3 weeks. And then I got a message from Disco. Went back when we were still sending, you guys were still sending messages halfway through the contest to see who was going to finish. And
yeah, we don't do that anymore.
I got it, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, I signed up for that, didn't I? I should probably do something. So within the last week of the contest, I ended up writing Home, and that was the first thing I ever did. I learned a lot from it. Like, I go back to it and I had to fix a bunch of stuff because like it's written like shit basically.
That's what we said. It's fine. Like, to write a screenplay with the formatting's bad.
Yeah, it's like the basic ideas are there, the basic plot is there, but like it is just a slog to actually sit down and read.
Can I just say, you like RJ McCready up on the North Pole right now. I'm sitting here, I'm looking for the cook on roller skates behind you.
Yeah, we need our green screen background so we can put the thing behind you. But I'm trying to think about, I think I remember you messaging, I guess, either the mods or me specifically, and saying, maybe I should, this was after you finished the script. And I had read at this point, and you said, could I pull the script out? I said, I'm not that confident in it. And you were sort of feeling like, I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll get there eventually, but I'm not this confident in the screenplay yet. And I read it and I said, this screenplay is really good, man. This is one of those promised screenplays, you know, it could be a little bit messy, but like I'm reading this and I know you're going to be a good writer who's going to be good in the community, you know, and I want to read what's next from you. And people really dug that script, me included. And like, as a result, we've had so many good scripts from you, and you won a contest and you're now one of the main writers in the sub. And it's like, that's the big thing here is a lot of writers, the big point I want to cover is nobody is confident in their first screenplay. No one. If they are, it's not a good screenplay, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, basically.
if you come forward and say like, I've written something, it took me 6 weeks, it is so good, and I want to get produced today, you'd be like, no, it's not good. It's going to be.
That's a great point. You know, I tell people all the time, this is a first draft. The fact that you were able to get random cues and structure a movie in 6 weeks is a miracle. And that it's in English, sort of, is a miracle. And you should be proud that you even finished or made something. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I do feel like often it's the opposite problem people have though, where they feel like, and you see this a lot on the subreddit and in the contest, people don't want to submit their scripts. Like you were saying with Astro, I've been there too. There's been a bunch of scripts like I'm hesitating to send it in because a lot of the time it's like you write these screenplays so fast, you don't have time to think about it. And you're thinking it's, you know, shit, you're thinking it's terrible, you're thinking what's the point? And a lot of those times when people do choose to send it in, sometimes they win contests. Sometimes like the scripts, they're not necessarily perfect. They're first drafts and they've been written very fast, but people find a lot of things they like in them.
And yeah, also you can watch a movie you hate and it's someone's favorite movie. That's any movie. I mean, like anything that's been made, there's somebody who really, really likes it and they unironically like it, you know? Like, and we see that with, as the mods, we see the votes and we'll, you know, see scripts that we think like that was all right, but you know, I don't know if that's, you know, gonna make it anywhere in the votes. And then we'll see it gets like several first place votes, you know, it may not get like anything outside of those, but it shows that specific people really dug that script, you know, like that happens a lot where you'll have scripts get just first place and they don't get second place or third place or anything, you know, and it's and those people who voted for it tell that person, they're like, this spoke to me so personally and I connected with it so much and I want to see what's next from you. And there's always a different audience for different types of scripts. So that's whenever anyone says, I'm not proud of the script, you know, I don't want to submit it. I kind of say like, there's somebody who may really love this and you need to, as a writer, expose yourself as much as possible. You need to like put that step, you know, through the door if you're going to walk fully through it. So back to the people. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
Part of being a writer is the imposter syndrome. I cannot tell you how many people that I look up to, that I've talked to, and they've had a show on a streaming network that was just killing everything. And they're just like, I don't know if I'll write again. I don't know when I'm going to work again. I don't know about this show. And you're like, that's just how we're wired. And it's probably a great sign.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally relationships. You get out of a bad relationship and you're like, I'm never going to, you know, and it's just like, you know, you're going to get to a point where you're like, I'm going to write again, you know, like, right. After you write a screenplay, and that's the same thing with, you know, looking back in your screenplays 3 years later and you're like, why did I do that? You know, or like, why did I think this was like, you know, there's people you date someone 3 years ago and you're like, I thought I was going to marry them, you know, and now you think about the script 3 years ago and you're like, did I think that this was worth producing? Did I think this would be a movie? And you like look back at it now as a more experienced writer and you think like, this was very much a self-indulgent, you know, younger writer, you know, younger man's type screenplay that was just built off of what I love, built off of those horror tropes you and I talked about. So with time, you know, you become a better writer because you have retrospect in your past scripts, but you have to write those past scripts to get there. And every good writer is going to show that promise in that first script. That's like a given. Like, I don't think there's really any writer who like just blew me away with a second script. The first script, I was just like, I don't know about them. Like, there's always that small element that I'll read a script and if it's messy and I'll say, well, you know, there's that element, there's that passion. Let's see what's next. So that's the most interesting thing to me, especially from the veterans.
Yeah, I think that you're never really a good judge of your own script. And going back to what you guys were talking about, Whether you think you've written the most amazing thing or whether you think you've written something that's complete shit, you're never going to know until you put it out there. And it's probably never going to be either of those. It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle, or, you know, there's going to be a mix of good and bad. So I think what's kind of nice about the contest is you get to write something, you put it out there, and you immediately get feedback. And a lot of the time, it's not what you were expecting. You know, some people might not like something you loved. Some people might love something that you really liked about it or you really disliked about it. But it's one of those things. It's like you're not going to be a good judge of your own stuff. You're too biased. You're too close to it. Like you just have to do it and put it out there and see what the response is.
Yeah, people ask like, what do you think of your script? I'm like, I'll tell you in a year when I can look back at it and say I have a less biased opinion. With time, I'm able to look back and say, here's my opinion, but not right now.
Well, see, I use a ton of feedback, and this sub is one of the great. There's a couple great things for me about this sub. The sub also it forces me to work, like you guys said, and then it operates as that first rung of feedback that I need because I need a ton of revisions and feedback. So I actually got more out of the scripts that people didn't necessarily. I don't want to say didn't like, but thought were like heavily flawed. And then I would take that and I would find a consensus opinion. Like I think about Escape the Wolf, and everyone's like, this would be better if they never left the hotel. Well, I rewrote it. I rewrote it 3,000 times. It doesn't leave the hotel now. That's the takeaway from the sub, and it allowed me to start a different path and rewrite a different film that worked differently. And so I think there's just some great things about the sub, and that's one of them.
I think also reading some bad scripts, not that like I don't think any scripts I've read, none of you all have had bad scripts. I mean, I could rank all your scripts and you've had great scripts and then scripts that are a little messy, like all of our first scripts, but we all have scripts I'm proud of, I think. But there are some contest scripts which we'll talk about and we're like, that was really kind of rough. And it's because we've read hundreds of scripts. But I'm so glad I read those because I learned more from a messy, bad structured script, because I can say like, well, this would have been better if they went to, such and such.
Right.
And
right.
like, as a result, I'm able to realize that like with a script that's good, I just think, well, that guy's a genius, He just wrote that off the top of his head. Yeah. But like with a bad script, I can say, here's how you fix it, and then it makes my own, it's like solving a puzzle in your head that you're able to figure out what the proper response is. Or you say like, here's how you should value characters. Here's, what you should do with the third act. And we try, it's a little, I try to avoid, there's a feedback I don't like giving, which I've seen a few people give, which is they will comment on someone's script on the discussion thread and say, I wish I had written this script. And I don't like that feedback because I think I could get lost in that. Like, it's just a black hole. If I told someone, I wish I'd written this script, it diminishes what they wrote because, it's like, I want to claim what is their baby. And I say, well, I'd raise it better than you would. It's
Right.
not like that, it's like you should help them foster their own idea. And that's the whole point of the sub. Whenever, you read a script you think needs to go in a different direction, you'd say, you brought it to this point. Here's the point where there's a fork in the road. And you can say which path you need to go down. How do you need to go down it? You're just supposed to help guide them there. You don't put a blindfold on them and push them. And that's, for the most part, I think the sub is very good about that.
I would say that the one great thing about the sub, and I'm sure you guys have some point, I'm sure you have, Tom, maybe you remember Trigger Street from back in the day?
I don't remember anything. I told you that.
Oh,
you have to explain it to me. And then I go, oh yeah, I remember that. Like when he said method, I was like, yeah, think about the curtain and this and that. But he was like my first script and I was like, blink.
Yeah, no, there was, back in the day, there was a it wasn't a contest, but it was a screenwriting community.
Okay.
And so essentially the way they worked it out is that you upload your script and you can get some feedback, but it all works on like a credit system.
Oh,
so
my wife did that.
You review somebody else's script and you get a credit and you can cash that credit in for feedback on your script. And then there's other screenplay contests where they have, an entrance fee. So you're paying somebody to look at it. I think what's nice about this one, and it started like this from the start, is that it's really a community thing. There's no, like, people just want to contribute. and everybody's focused on, you know, learning and getting better. And you actually learn a lot just from reading other people's scripts and giving feedback. It's not just about, you know, getting feedback for your own script.
Right.
And so, you know, you can come to this contest and you get amazing feedback on your script that's incredibly insightful. Everybody, and it's been like that from the start, everybody came in with their own ideas for, you know, how to run things, how to do things, and it's kind of formed from there. And I would say, you know, like now it's still like you're not going to get this much feedback anywhere else without, you know, paying for it, without, you know, doing some, like, you know, doing something to you know, earn it. Like,
Right.
this is a place where people come really just to learn and grow as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I think writing the feedback is just as good as receiving it, honestly, because by writing feedback, you're able to unlock your own brain and realize your true thoughts about something. I mean, most people don't really show what they really think until they've written it down on paper, because it allows them, you know, to think about where they want to like take their thought process with what they're trying to teach. And that, like I said, unlocks their own brain to understand how to tell a story effectively.
I think one of the things that made me a better screenwriter was actually providing feedback, because being able to find the points that work and don't in a script and hone in on that and help somebody tell the best story that they can possibly tell, that they want to tell. If you can find the little pieces that don't make it work, and you can be like, just point to them. You don't have to tell them how to do it. Be like, hey, fix this, work on that, stuff like that. Like when you go back and write your own stuff, you go, well, I know not to do that because I knew it bothered me while I was reading this other script. And
Yeah, absolutely.
a lot of the times, like when I get feedback, my main thing that I want to do is I want to help this person tell the best version of this story they're trying to tell that I possibly can. And yeah, sometimes, you know, you burn out giving feedback a lot, like especially lately with the amount of scripts we get per contest. Like I think it was when did we get like 18 features? It was when you wrote Escape the Wolf Brute, and I remember that. It was like
Yeah, there was a certain point where it was
18,
brutal.
19 features, and like you'd get halfway through and you go, I just want to take a nap. Like
Yeah,
I'm,
you definitely
I'm
get
done
that.
here. But like you got to keep going, and like it's the best thing that we can do for the people here is just make sure that they know, like, okay, this is the things that look like you did them great, and here are the things that you could probably work on, or little fixes you could make to make the story more streamlined, or have all your themes line up the way you want them to, or just little stuff that, and of course all of us have different views on it too. Like Brutal go after like action lines. If they're messed up, he's going to let you know. Like if the story's not interesting or you have like boring parts, you're going to let us know, Veg, and Disco will let us know whatever goes on in his head when he's reading it. And like it's nice because you get different feedback from different types of people. Like if you go somewhere and you pay for feedback, generally you're going to get one reader, they're going to give you one take on it, and that's all you're going to get. Because like you'll see contests where like you pay like what, you'll pay $60 for an entry fee or 130 for also coverage at the same time.
Right.
You know, it's not an insignificant amount of money if like you're not, you know, maybe you're not working, you know, it's the pandemic, maybe you don't want to do that, but like you can get different feedback from lots of different types of people here, and it's been helpful to me receiving it and giving it to other people for the past almost 3 years now.
Yeah,
Right.
I've mentioned that before, that with the prompt contest, that was the one I wrote the screenplay Showstopper. That was a family-friendly horror script, and I won that contest, and the prize was a pro script reader gave feedback on it. And I was very grateful for that prize I was paid for, but I wasn't a fan of the feedback. Like the feedback, I'd gotten far better feedback on the sub, because the feedback the guy gave was, you know, oh, if I had written this, you know, and that's what I talked about before, you know. He gave an infamous feedback that the character is a lonely high school girl, and he said to show she's a lonely high school girl, you should have her in the cafeteria eating a tuna sandwich, because that's what lonely high school girls do. And this is a script that's dripped in Mexican culture, and it's a very fun, lighthearted script. And I could think of nowhere in the script to put in randomly a girl eating a tuna sandwich to show that she is lonely in high school.
Was that my harebrained scheme? Was that my harebrained prize?
I don't know whose prize idea it was.
I think it was me, because I think I went and found a script reader, and then
I'm very grateful for it. Like it was like
no, it's all right. Yeah. I can laugh at my mistakes.
No, I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's just I'm more talking about that the contest itself, from having writers that are like you know,
right.
They gave better feedback than a guy who jumped in and said, if I had written it, here's what
They
I
don't
would
have,
have done.
because they don't have the investment. And I can tell you that for a lot of people, like I had this conversation 2-3 days ago where it's like, listen, how do you give your notes? How do you talk to people? How do you do it? And if you're reading a ton of scripts, are you doing it? And do you actually care about the people you talk to? There's certain things on our sub that I'll never say to some people. You know, I might not like your script. I'm not going to dump on your script a certain way. And I think Roger Ebert always used to say, I don't judge a movie by an arbitrary standard. I say, did it accomplish what it set out to do? And that's how I have to judge a film. So there were films that he gave 4 stars, like The Devil's Rejects, that he admits he didn't like, but he says, I cannot say that it did not accomplish what it set out to do.
Absolutely. That's like basically the philosophy that all the mods, I think, live by, that, you know, if we like movies that accomplish what they're not pretending to be something else. Like a movie that is completely honest in what it is, like the 1999 Mummy film. It knows it's a dumb, big action film, and it fully embraces that and is very fun. The 2017 Mummy film with Tom Cruise does not know what it is. It thinks it's a Marvel Cinematic Universe film about a mummy. You know, it's so bad for that reason.
Bizarre.
Because it doesn't understand what it is. If it had understood it's some stupid film about a mummy girl swinging around on chains, you know, making out with Tom Cruise, it's just, it could have embraced that and been a lot more fun. But it unfortunately didn't. It had the typical Hollywood, you know, Tom Cruise is some 50-year-old man hitting on some, you know, woman half his age, you know, running around Egypt. Like it didn't work. As opposed to Brendan Fraser's, you know, like when the mummy screams at him, he just screams back at it. That moment is so good because it's so stupid and it understands, you know, exactly what the movie needs.
Well, you know, the sad thing is the movie that preceded Deep Rising with Treat Williams is fantastically entertaining. It's really a dry run for those mummy movies. And that is just B movie gold. That is just such a wonderful, you can watch it right now and be like, oh, that's an awesome ride.
Yeah, but that's the point of that. You do things wrong and you learn from it. That Universal did The Mummy, and they said, hey, we're going to make a Marvel Cinematic Universe film with this Russell Crowe, Nick Fury. And it was such an absolute failure that they gave away the monsters to Blumhouse and said, just make Invisible Man. And Invisible Man is good, you know? Like it's a very low budget, serviceable, fun movie. And like, as opposed to The Mummy, it's a fantastic film. And that's exactly what they need to learn from and do, was actually not to overshoot themselves.
Oh, I apologize. That ties into what we were talking about a while ago, which is if you're new to this sub and you're saying, I want to put together a script and I have those prompts, how do I do it? This is overwhelming. And one of the tips that I got is put together your log line and think of your film as the log line and have those pieces in place. And so I'm like, and this is something, by the way, people, I'm on Clubhouse at Tom Moore. Right now on Wednesdays, I have a room where we're talking about log lines and pitches. And we have some people with obviously more expertise talking about it, but how important this stuff is, because if you're going to use a basic formula, your log line again is your protagonist, or whose eyes are we looking through? Who's your lead? Then they're going along living their life. What is the inciting incident that changes the rhythm of their life and starts our story? And then what are they going to do about that incident? And then who's the antagonist and who's the opposing force? So when you're sitting there and they give you your thing and you go, soda can and Gollum, how do I make a movie about that? The first thing you can start doing is put together your log line and start going, okay, so who's doing this and whose life is this? And then how does it change? And what are they going to do about it? And who doesn't want them to have it? And that's just a great jumping off point for clarity on your script.
That's a good transition point, because I wanted to bring up like what you start out with a screenplay. That for me, the things I always know is 3 things, which is I know the main character, I know the log line, and I know the last shot of the film. I know what I'm working towards. I always figure that out. I'm able to just get a general haze of the direction of the film in my head. And I say, here's what we're working towards, because I want the finale to be something that is satisfying. And if I can think of a last shot in my head that is satisfying, I'll think like, okay, that's good. How do we work up towards it? And that's because, you know, you read enough Stephen King when you're younger and you think, I don't want to, you know, have a wonderful, you know, story that gets to a 3rd act and it's built up too much to, you know, create a satisfying end. Because what he does is, which is fine because he's a master storyteller, is he makes these wonderful characters that he enjoys spending time with. He writes his books and he just, gets to a point to where the story has to end. And usually the biggest criticism of him is he has all these characters and not all of them can live. So you have like in Salem's Lot, I remember a bunch of characters die at once in the third act, and it was just very unceremonious. And I was like, I really like those characters. I wish that they had a more fulfilling character arc that wasn't just they died because the climax can have them be alive. So because of experiences like that in my head, I thought like I'm gonna know my ending before it happens, because I don't want to make myself feel that own way. I want to know what I'm working towards, and I want my characters to be satisfying as they reach that point. But Stephen King is obviously a master. He is a far better writer than any of us. Maybe not Maximum Overdrive, but that's his one screenplay, so we have him there. But again, no, that's a screenplay. That's a movie that knows what it is. This was what we were just talking about. There's a bunch of trucks that kill people. So I'm not going to criticize that.
If they didn't shoot he didn't get to shoot what he actually wanted, and I'd like to, because they're like the actual script is not what you think, and so I'd like to pursue that a little bit more. I'd like to see the actual script, although controversially, I think his short stories translate better to movies than his novels.
Most definitely.
That would derail this.
We'll do a Stephen King episode later, but
yeah.
But yeah, for your y'all's own process, whenever you get your subject and your condition within that day, what are you thinking of in your head?
Somebody that's not me, by the way.
Yeah, I think we've both covered it. So
I'm gonna be like McCready.
I'll start. I'll do it. But when I first get my stuff, I usually just look at it, like whatever condition, subject, what title, whatever the contest ends up being. I take it and I look at it and I go, if I only knew those two things about a movie when I came into it, what would I want to see? Like, what kind of movie would I want out of that? And from there, I'll come up with, like basic pitches, basic logline ideas, like something stupid. Like for Nagy, when I got my stuff, I was like, oh, what if there was a killer tree on a plane? That'd be fucking stupid. And so I was like, all right, let's write a script about it. And so it's like you take a basic idea, you go, okay, we could do this the obvious way, which could be fun, or we could take it in a direction completely opposite from what I thought. But whatever pops into my head first, when I think of those two things together, that's usually what I'll go for. And from there, you can build out from like that basic kernel of an idea. And you go, okay, so I want to do this. This is the type of movie that I want to write. How are we going to make it happen? And how are we going to make it work? And from there, just like coming up with ideas, doing research, and everything else forms from that initial kernel of an idea, from just looking at the two going, what would I want to see out of this?
So you do it pretty quickly then, John.
It can take a little while to get going sometimes. Like sometimes I'll look at it and I go, I have no idea how to make that work. I'm going to sit on it for a couple of days, and I'll go and, I'll watch movies that might be kind of similar in tone to like the stuff I was given, or I'll go read or something. Just do his other stuff. Don't, like, if you're having trouble coming up with an idea, there's nothing worse than sitting there and staring at it until you get frustrated, because the ideas are going to come slower and slower. So a lot of times it is, okay, what can I do to support my thought process when it comes to the script I'm trying to write? Do I need to watch something? Do I need to listen to something? Do I just need to start writing? Anything that you can do at that point, if you're stuck, and when you look at it, just like the weirdest little things can knock it free. Like it could be something like you're driving to work and you see something and you go, actually, that's a good idea. And you're like logically, it doesn't make sense from looking at it, but the idea just hits you just like that.
Well, I talk to myself in the car. Like I'll figure out the characters and I'll just like try and have a conversation. I'll be like a maniac, but it's fine because it's like, what else am I going to do? You can just, listen to music or talk to yourself, be your fictional screenplay characters, because you're trying to get this plot going in your head.
I remember William Goldman, I think it's Adventures in the Screen Trade, always said, talk out loud, talk your dialogue out loud, get the rhythms and everything. And he talked about writing Marathon Man, and he started to notice that his neighbors were freaked out. And that's when he realized he was in the middle of the night typing, screaming and acting out the torture scenes. And they were hearing him do it, So no, that's perfectly sane for what we're doing.
I think Marathon Man's a good example, because it's like, it's very different. If you're writing a character who is an escaped Nazi criminal, he's going to sound differently than the typical American, whatever Dustin Hoffman's role was. Right. when you say that out loud, there's a different inflection. There's obviously different accents, so you realize this dialogue is going to be delivered differently. So that's what helps to read your own screenplay out loud. It's okay. Whenever you finish a first draft, you should read it out loud, because you may realize different things about your character's voice now that you're saying it out loud, or you may realize like this doesn't feel natural, like there's plenty of lines that, everyone who worked in the first Star Wars, that George Lucas, they could tell him at that point, this does not sound natural. I'm not going to say this. Right. Like as a result, you had a lot of those lines get cut out. This is stuff everybody knows, but once the prequel started, nobody could tell George this doesn't sound natural. I'm not gonna say this because like, oh, that's George Lucas. You can't say that, right. Especially when your main character is a child. So he's not gonna say, I don't think this is realistic dialogue. So that's the most important thing for you as an author, is finding a character's voice and making sure they don't. I just watched Disco and I talking about this Malcolm and Marie on Netflix, and that is so obviously the writer, just his voice coming out through two characters, it was not two singular characters. It was not these two unique people that are very clearly different. It was the author, his voice coming out of two actors. Yeah, I know you're making a face. I mean,
no, I was just like, no, when you said Malcolm and Marie, I was like, there's a few things going on with that one. And I'm like, oh boy, yeah, that's not going over well right now.
No, but I mean, that's the point of that, is that like, that's, the author not having his character stand out. Like there's so many things I could say about that movie that it did not flow well at all. It was definitely just a movie that was on repeat for me. That was my major issue, was that it had the same general plot of, they would fight, they would make up. Here's a new dialogue point that is just the director pushing his own, views. To the
it was
same
the White
characters.
House without the shots.
Yeah, exactly. And, but like, it was just on repeat, it was just, fight, make up, new monologue, fight, make up, new monologue. And it just, the flow didn't work for me because of that. And I think like in a normal non-movie world, if you had just experimented, made an AI of those two characters, they would have gone home and been like, hey, why didn't you thank me at the award ceremony tonight? Like, I don't know, babe, let's go to bed. And they would have gone to bed and the movie would have been over. It would have been 5 minutes long. There would have been no fights. It would not have been, a 2-hour movie or whatever it was. And like, I think if you just ran an AI there, it would have been fine. They would have, in the morning, they might have said more of their conversation, but like not at like 4 a.m., it just didn't feel natural to me. And I think if you read that out loud, as a screenwriter, if you read a scenario like that out loud, like the same scenario is in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and that is very much more natural. And that's because it has two characters that have been added to the marriage of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, that there are two outsiders that have been added to that formula. And because of that, that makes sense for them to continue on in their fight and have these monologues and talk about things like their son, which they would not normally talk about if it was just the two of them.
There's definitely a way to do it, and he didn't accomplish that. Now, Dylan, let me ask you, what's your process? First of all, Dylan, what I want to ask you is, do you have a beard?
I don't really have. I have a terrible COVID, in between beard.
Okay, I was gonna say, if you don't have a beard, you're out.
Yeah, we sort the Kurt Russells in the bottom there.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I can call this a beard, but yeah, I've got something. So
okay, I've got patches here. This isn't a great beard. I've got patches, so I can stay a mod. So you're gonna have to give me something.
Yeah, we're thinking about bringing on a new mod, so they have to have facial hair. We didn't mention that, but
for women.
Yeah, put that in the requirement. No, for my process, I don't like to go in with a preconceived idea. Usually what I like to do is I wait for my subject and condition, and then I start from there. And I consider the subject and condition kind of like a writing prompt. I think it's really good for like coming up with new ideas and stimulating your creativity. And I know you can always go in with an idea and plug it in. And I did do that one time kind of, but most of the time what I like to do is I have my subject, I have my condition, and then I think about them and I think about, what connects these two, what's interesting about them, how are they different? So for instance, with my script Charlie's World, I got my subject was vampires and my condition was it has to involve a dinosaur.
Hmm.
And I had no clue how the hell I was going to connect those. I was actually pissed off when I got that at first, because I was like, what the fuck? But
You know what? You're gonna stop with these stupid conditions. I saw the B movie thread.
But yeah, no, what I did when I got it was I think about it, I go, okay, well, how can I connect these two things? And I go, okay, a vampire and a dinosaur are both something a kid likes. So now I have a connection there. I have a theme. I have childhood and, a kid's, fantasies and imagination. And I kind of create the idea from there. And so that's my process. I don't really start with like a plot. I don't start with a character or a log line. I kind of just start from, what's the theme and what can I kind of develop around that theme. And yeah, that's my process for the contest. And I think that's my process for ideas outside the contest too. I'll get a little thought in my head or I'll see something interesting and I just build out the story idea from there.
Okay.
I think the major thing for me is just not repeating myself. I don't go with many planned. There's only one time when I wrote the screenplay Van Helsing's Guide to Monsters, where I had this idea. I was like, I want to write a script about a descendant of Van Helsing making a mockumentary film, about monsters. And so I was like, I'm going to make whatever I get be the script, and I forced it to be that way. But the only thing is I'll look at my past screenplay and I'll say, I'm not going to repeat what I just did whenever I get a new subject or condition. So it's interesting to look at like your main characters and how they differ after you write one. Because I notice I usually go just boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. Like it's usually it's not boy, boy, girl, girl, it's because I just wrote a screenplay with a female character and I'm like, okay, it's time for a male character. It's like your mind just naturally wants to break away from what you just did, So like, oh, you just did old character, here's a young character. And it's just like my main characters as a result will try to contrast as much as possible with what I just did. And it's because I want to make them, interesting for me to write. I fear that like, I'd write a screenplay and I'm like, well, this is just, this guy from a year ago. I don't want to do that again. And I already realized his voice. I don't want to write what is a pale imitation of a character I've already visited because there are so many different unique voices you want to explore.
You see, for me, I don't read fiction. So what happens is I only read nonfiction or tons of articles. So normally what I'm writing about is the thing that I was just excited about or just found out. And there's just the thing about that nonfiction is that it rings true with people and the stories are so much better. Haunted room, huh? Are we doing host?
My dog just barked.
No. Part of this was Corrigan decided to climb up on the couch while we were doing this, so I understand.
If she barks again, I'll let her out and you guys keep talking.
Oh,
see if she can wait.
So, yeah, when you have nonfiction, you have this wonderful store of stories that you can pull. Like I just was reading about Mississippi Burning, and one of the things that didn't make it into the movie is that there was a guy called the Grim Reaper that was a hitman for the mafia. And so the FBI has always had these informal relationships with people when they needed them. And when they needed to find out certain details from the Klan members, they bring in the Grim Reaper and they take him down to the South and they go, listen, we can't legally torture these people, but you can. So I need you to do what you need to do to these people to get this key information. And there's this stretch of Grim Reaper just capturing people and torturing them until they can get the information that they need. And I'm like, wait, they kind of left this out of the movie. This was real. This is what this guy went on to do, but he just loved sadism so much the government just said, hey, let's just use him.
You and I both take a lot of influence from real life things.
Right.
That we've had screenplays that actually repeat,
Right.
The strangest thing for me was that the screenplay Endgame that I wrote before Avengers came out, the main character has cystic fibrosis. And I had been watching videos by this girl called Claire Wineland, who is the most prominent person with cystic fibrosis. And I had been watching, like before the contest, just learning about this disease. I mean, not disease,
Right.
So I was just very interested in this. And I was like, oh, I'll make my character have cystic fibrosis. And since I've learned so much about it, and the week the contest started, that girl died. She was going to have a surgery to have new lungs put in, and she just passed away due to cystic fibrosis complications. And I felt so awkward about it that I was just like, I'd written about 20 pages so far with a main character very clearly inspired by this real person and her real struggle, with lungs that did cause her death. And I made a post about it in the subreddit, and I said, the person who I based the screenplay on just passed away. I don't feel comfortable writing this now.
Right.
And the majority of people said, if you've put the research into this and want to show cystic fibrosis through your screenplay, which we know you've done the research and you're going to make it, an accurate portrayal, then you should do that and honor this person who you're going to honor anyway when she was alive. So that screenplay ends with, a dedication to Claire Wineland, who passed away from cystic fibrosis. And it was just very interesting to have, something based in real life that within the week I was writing it had a major complication in its story.
That's
so
why
for
I'm
me,
writing a
yeah.
COVID impeachment movie.
That's the thing is, it's very hard when something happens right now and you're writing a screenplay. It's just like, if you'd written, think back to like last May, if somebody said, hey, write a COVID script, it would be so different from the COVID script you would write right now.
Right.
Because it's very hard to write for the moment. And that's like with the GameStop story, with the Wall Street bets. You can see like there's so many people that are like, when's the movie coming out? And it's like, you have to wait because you're maybe in act 2 right now.
To see if any of those movies actually came out.
Yeah. It's, like, who knows, like whenever you were starting that, whenever people were selling, saying, oh, here's what the screenplay is going to be, you were in act 1 of that story. It was not there yet. So that's a lot of people. I think the mods are the ones most interested in looking to historical and real resources whenever they write a screenplay, because a lot of other people in this contest, they talked about, they see that and they're like, I don't want to write something that I may do, disjustice to, something real. And I totally understand that. Like, that's, for a lot of people, writing a screenplay is a way to escape the real world. And whenever your screenplay becomes the real world, it's like, did you escape?
Right. I just use it to ground details. To me, that research is part of my writing, because once you understand a person's world, then you understand how it influences their decisions. This is just a random thing, but you think about like the Irish potato famine, and you go, people starved to death and they were 15 miles away from the water. Why didn't they go and fish? All right. So then you need to understand what was happening in Ireland at that era with those people that made the idea of going just to the ocean insurmountable, that it was more reasonable for them to believe they should die where they were than to just do that.
Yep.
And then you understand their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who knows a lot about 9/11 history, that's the thing I hear the most is the Mark Wahlbergs of the world. They're like, if I'd been on that plane, I would have stopped it. If my kids were on there, wouldn't have happened. And it's because, they can't fathom themselves failing or dying in a situation. And even if it's like some historical thing like the Irish potato famine, like, hundreds of years ago, it's just like, any way they pitch themselves in their head, they're the hero.
But it's not about, it's not about us. And that's the thing. Writing is about empathy.
Yep.
Writing is about understanding how does somebody else in this circumstance feel, and then extrapolating what they would do. So it's not me. Tom Moore is very relevant. I'm highly relevant, and my life isn't that interesting. But what about this person?
That's why self-insert characters can be a little dangerous, because, when you put yourself in there, you're the hero, you're the main character, and that's going to be your ego going out on the page. I do that.
That's why John Patterson's my hero. Whenever I need a hero, I go John Patterson, and then I'm just the guy.
And there's also, people sometimes write characters they obviously wish that they were, and that'll get a little Jack Reacher. That's a book series. It was a Tom Cruise series of movies. And Jack Reacher is written like, they literally say like, this is a human fridge. He's like 6'7". He has just massive forms of steel, and it's like, anytime he talks to a woman, I'm just like, this has never happened ever. And it's like, it seems so clearly to me that the writer is just like, I'm me. I'm this massive human fridge killing machine who women just instantly faint at the sight of.
They're making him do it, you know.
So this is my second writer, famous acclaimed writer that I've ripped into. So I need to stop before I go on someone else.
You know, this will come up 7 years from now when you're trying to have a career, and they'll be like, "This podcast," and you're like, "Crap."
I know. I'm expecting Lee Childs and Stephen King outside the door for me with a bat right now.
You just never know.
But that's the thing is, after you read a lot of the veterans for this contest, you read their screenplays. Through their main characters, you learn a lot about them. Through the characters they choose to follow, you learn more about what their personality is like. Like with Disco Screenplays, I've mentioned he has a lot of family themes, you know, and that's obviously something that is on his mind that, you know, I mean, everyone has their themes. Spielberg he has the absent father figures, you know, and that's because he had a father who was rather absent. It's like, it's very obvious where these things come from. So, I mean, I'm sure, you know, not to go into your head, Disco, but it's just like, you have thought about, you know, like, oh, what if I had a family? What would this be like? You know, and you go through those natural thoughts in your head. And because you have those thoughts, you're like, well, I'll write a screenplay. That's a natural way for me to get them on page. And it's basically writing for everyone is therapy. I mean, for all of us, that we're able to get something out of our head physically, you know, we can print it out and look at it. And that is therapy, getting things out of your head. So for any writer, the art of writing is gonna be good for you because you're emptying this brain. So,
especially horror.
Yes, especially horror. I mean,
there's a lot of genres you could write. I don't know about you guys. Maybe you could speak to it, but what exactly is it that attracts you to horror as opposed to other genres?
One of y'all can go because I feel like I've been talking too much.
Well, let me start with Dylan because Dylan's been laying low and I can't see him. I just feel like he's judging me. What was it that attracted you to horror?
Hopefully he's still there.
Not,
there he is.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm still here.
He is quietly judging.
No, I don't really know what attracted me to horror. I've been into horror from a young age. It's not the only thing I'm into, but I don't know. I think it's one of those things. I like the horror community. It's the one community where everybody's really involved and passionate. You know, there's a horror subreddit. There's no comedy subreddit or rom-com subreddit.
It is a great community. Honestly.
Yeah.
Consistently.
There's a lot of people. They're very passionate. And I think when it comes to horror, I don't know, something about it has always just appealed to me. I kind of look at horror as like a way to represent, you know, the fears of the things we're afraid of or issues in our world. Like there's a lot of horror movies that reflect, you know, different, you know, societal issues or personal issues. And it just appeals to me in that sense, I think. Whereas a lot of the time, you know, I can watch a drama movie about something that happened, you know, 50 years ago, and it might not connect with me on the same level that horror does. But we all get afraid of things. There's all, you know, there's always, you know, threats and, you know, danger and stuff like that. And I think it just kind of appeals to me, and maybe on, you know, a more emotional, basic emotional level. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to sit down and think about it to give a better answer.
Well,
but
I prefer doing things on the spot and off the cuff and making people uncomfortable, apparently. So I apologize.
I think it's just a very adaptable genre. I think that's the thing for me is that, you know, you can have a horror film that goes into every single other genre.
You can.
And it's been represented since the beginning of cinema, you know? I mean, like, you can go back to Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And, you know, there were other genres that took time, you know, to fully form and had to wait for, you know, film to catch up before they were going to make those type of films. But horror, like from the very beginning, was able to make its presence known because, you know,
Edison did a short Frankenstein film, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That one's like Edison. Yeah. And it's a human emotion. It's, you know, like horror, you know, we all have, it's like one of the first films ever. It's just a couple kissing, you know, that's because that's a human emotion. That's love. And people knew from the beginning of that, you know, period of film starting, I want to display all the human emotions on film. So, romance, then being scared. I mean, people saw The Train, whatever the name of that film is, The Train coming at, and they're like, and it's because that was scary to them. And that was one of the core human emotions. And after that, that was basically probably the first start of we can scare someone with this. So for me, it's that, you can tell a horror story that's also a romance, it's also a comedy, it's also an action film. You can go through so many different genres through the horror genre. And there's a lot of other genres that are just restrictive with how you're able to cross things over. So for me, horror is the best genre that is malleable for telling a story that covers many points.
What about you, John?
I decided to write horror just because it's kind of what I always liked. When I was younger and you go to a video store, you'd see all the covers, you'd end up picking something out. Horror movies had the best VHS covers, like
oh my God,
nothing
you're
else.
right.
Nothing else was like it. And
True.
and like Ben said, you can do a lot of stuff within horror. Like there's a really big difference between Cannibal Holocaust and Pterodactyl Woman from Beverly Hills. Like these are still under the same genre, different subgenres and stuff like that. But you can add bits and pieces from anything else to it without it being, weird or anything. Whereas if you take like a drama and you try to add stuff to it, you got to play a bit more of a balancing act. But horror just works to mix with other things. It's almost like what's another, like a music genre that you can mix with a lot of stuff. It's almost like jazz. There's tons of different permutations you can do, and they're all viable in their own way, and all of them have their own fans. But you can do just about anything with it, and it can still be considered jazz or horror.
Yeah, and is an accessible point basically for any horror film. Like I remember when I was a kid, I'd want to watch, the more violent horror films. My mom would say, no, you can't watch those. And she knew I was interested in this stuff. So she's like, here's The Wolfman from the 1940s. And it's still a horror movie. So I was satisfied. Yeah. And that was just the stepping point. I'd watch that, then I watched something else. And eventually I was watching Alien. And she'd walk in and watching Alien and say, how could you watch? You're going to go to bed, have nightmares. And I'm like, this is one of my favorite films of all time. So that's very unfortunate if I have nightmares from my favorite film.
Unfortunately, I got in too deep. I remember seeing The Fly way too early and going, yep, I'm out of my depth. So,
so it's interesting. That's very interesting actually to ask horror writers was, when did you watch your first kind of R horror film, which maybe would have been Halloween for me. I don't know how old I would have been. I would have definitely been probably too young, but I think I snagged a copy of Halloween, and that just was such a important memory to realize horror films can be that effective. And that's not really even a violent film, there's barely any blood in it. But everyone has their point that they enter horror films and they say, this is good. Is there more? And there's always going to be more. That's the great thing about horror.
All right. Now, let me ask you. The sub had questions, and I forgot what they were.
I've got them pulled up.
Who has the sub questions? All right.
Unless, Astro, do you want to pull them up?
I got them right here.
Okay, sweet.
All right. So we'll do this in order. I'll ask it, and then we'll do.
It'll be chaos.
Yeah, it'll be chaos. Well, I'll answer at the same time, and I'll push the recording up so everything's in the red. And then they'll figure it out as they go. All right, first question. Dylan asks, writing a feature-length script can be very intimidating, especially if you have never written before. What tips would you give a first-time writer trying to tackle writing a feature in 6 weeks?
We definitely went over that, I guess, in the beginning, where we just said, your first feature is going to not be your best work. Yeah. It'll be this raw, untapped potential that'll show, and it's going to be missing some commas, So you just got to write it. I mean, with most things, the best way, my most probably destructive personality trait is I never read an instruction manual, and I just, immediately jump into something, and I'm just like, why would I read the instruction manual when I could just learn how to do it by having the car in front of me and just fixing it myself. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, that could take longer, or I can screw it up, but I've definitely learned by the end of it, because I've been forced to do something myself, and I don't give myself a crutch like that. And it's because if I jump into something, it's going to get done. It may not get done the best, but it's going to get done, and I'm going to learn how to do it better by doing that. I don't mean to say you should all fix your cars without looking stuff up online. That's a mistake I've made plenty of times. So the car analogy wasn't good, but right, for screenplays, yeah.
I would say always start with your log line. Because the formula I described before is a very basic one. It doesn't apply to everything. But what happens is it forces you to structure your story. So you're like, I know who's doing what why they're doing it, and who's trying to stop them. And I would say, in addition to the log line, one of the things that structuring it that way does is it creates the conflict that propels the story first, because you want your lead character to have the same goal as your antagonist, so that only one of them can get that goal. So when you just lay out, okay, I have this intimidating idea, what do I do? Lay out the log line, and then you go, this is the goal, only one of them can have it. How does this battle happen? And if you do that, you can have your movie put together really, really quickly.
I would say just write it. And I think the good thing about the contest is that once you write one script in 6 weeks, you're never going to have a problem writing a screenplay again.
I totally agree.
It's very it's very challenging the first time, but you've just got to do it. No matter how it turns out, if you are in the contest, no matter how it turns out, submit it, because you really cannot judge your own script. And you just have to get it out and get it done. And it's going to be, way easier after you do that initial one. But the initial one's going to be challenging. You just have to push through it.
And my best advice would be write something you want to watch. Because at the end of the day, if you are enthusiastic about it, if you think it's something that would be awesome, that would be a movie, you're going to put in the work. Like, if you are happy with what you're writing, you're going to want to make it better, and you can visualize it in your head better. And that's the best advice I could give for a first one. All right. Another question from Dylan. How important do you think it is to follow a story circle, or to find the beats and turns to the plot in each act, like you might see talked about in screenwriting related videos and essays?
Okay, again, I don't read instruction manuals. I bought plenty of screenplay books, and I'll read half of them. And it's just like, the screenplay book will say, like, you can learn from Die Hard. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I'll just go watch Die Hard and never read the book again, because it's just like, I mean, I have this, like I said, I have the set point at the end where I say, oh, here's what we're going to lead to, and it's just a matter of getting there. And that's what inspires me to get there. So I guess it is a circle, or just a relative point, a story, that the hero's progression, that there is point A, point B, and there's whatever's in between, and that's up to me for the next 6 weeks. So I like scripts that break away from the traditional mold, like I said, with that first script, Rouse Him Not, that had the gods getting wrecked by the army. I was like, I like that a lot. So that changed the typical mold. So I'm not saying, write everything non-linear, but it's just, there's definitely people that if they had read Pulp Fiction without Pulp Fiction existing, they would say, what's this? Why is it structured this way? And now with us, having had Pulp Fiction be a part of our lives, and obviously any screenwriter gets brought up to them, you're like, yeah, how could it not be structured that way? So it's about writing what's for you, but you don't get pretentious about how you tell your story. So for most people, yes, you should outline.
I would say, I'm sorry. I would say that you would want to walk before you run. There's a lot of bad advice on writing out there. So I think the biggest thing that I do is try to take your advice from somebody that's actively working right now and that's actively relevant. There's a lot of screenwriting gurus, and then when push comes to shove, you're like, they haven't done anything, they're not working, and nobody in the business really backs it. So for instance, there's a story pyramid going around that a lot of people just pass around and laugh at. That's completely different than Dan Harmon's story circle, which is actually a really efficient way for you to quickly produce work. So for you, if you see something online, see if this is a person that's currently working, and if people that are currently working view them as credible, and there's a consensus opinion that there's some value to that, and understand that your mileage may vary and that particular structure might not work for you, and you might need to find something that works for you. But it can be a good shortcut if it's from somebody credible.
Yeah, my third and final person to dunk on is the YouTube film critic Chris Stuckman. Wrote a screenplay scene for Batman v Superman. He did a video saying, oh, what a horrible movie. And he said, oh, obviously I could do this movie better. And he wrote a screenplay scene for Batman and Superman's fight, and it was shockingly hilarious. And then he deleted it from Twitter after it got memed on. It was being put everywhere. And he was like, haha, it was written as a joke. I'm so glad you guys laughed at the joke that I wrote. It was a joke screenplay. And obviously, that's, every screenwriter who saw that movie was just like, I could write better Batman v Superman than that. And that's because something like Batman is not hard to understand. I think literally anyone could write a Batman film. It wouldn't be good, but anyone could write a Batman film because you understand the formula. It's a very set formula. But that doesn't mean it's going to be good just because you understand his formula. You might be blinded by being a fan or blinded by your own kind of ambitions into thinking I could do better. So yeah, somebody that hasn't had any success saying here's the way to do this, I mean, like I said, I think that like with that first screenplay, you've just got to start writing it and you're going to learn the most from your failures. And you need to own up to those failures. If you write a screenplay that has some embarrassing bits, and there's that Rick and Morty bit about like some guy who captures Morty and
yes,
forces him to read a
we just
screenplay.
left with that.
Yeah. Because we were just talking
3
about
weeks earlier.
Yeah. And they just say, he's like, well, what do you mean it wasn't good? And he like tries to kill him or something. Yeah. But that's, if somebody has no experience and they write a screenplay and they won't accept criticism on a screenplay, don't listen to them. I mean, that's, if you have even if you have experience, accept criticism. So I think I've digressed a lot from the story circle here, but yeah, you should outline, but you should also be free to follow what you think is deserving of your story.
Okay. And then John, Dylan, same question. Also, is there anybody that, let me just add an addendum. Is there anybody that you look at and you're like, hey, I like their structure or I like their thing and perhaps you've used?
I would say, I mean, when it comes to story structure and that question specifically, I would say focus on making the story interesting, first and foremost. I used to go to screenwriters groups and I would say on average, the scripts were a lot more professionally written than the scripts we get in the group on average, but they were also a lot less interesting. The ideas were, crap. It's like you can only, if you've got a bad idea or a story you're not passionate about, you can dress it up and, refine the story structure and all that, but you've got a rotting core at that point. So I think I'm not experienced enough to, really give advice on like story structure or, whether you should join those like script circles or whatever. But my thing is, focus on doing something you're passionate about, an idea you love. Focus on something that's interesting. Don't just try to mimic what you see in Hollywood films or in any film for that matter. And just try and, replicate what somebody else did. Bring your own vision and your own imagination. And you can always refine the story structure later and do second drafts and, work on all the beats and that sort of stuff. But you really need to make sure that, you've got something that people are actually going to want to spend their time, watching.
Totally.
And you can have, a story structure that's like you can have a terrible movie and the story structure is perfect, but the movie just sucks for other reasons. So it's not the be all and end all from my perspective. But it's definitely something that has to be considered.
I think a lot of people worship screenwriters that just write good dialogue. Like they could have very bad story structure, but their dialogue would be good. And that's, Aaron Sorkin does have some good story structure, but obviously he's known for his dialogue. And that's why you see a lot of copycat Aaron Sorkin writers that do their own movies or series. And it's very obvious they're going through this rapid fire, I'm very smart type dialogue, which works in Social Network, but not in those ripoff type shows. Mm-hmm. And that's because people see his style work and they want to copy it.
I just want to jump in and say, when I'm saying what I just said, I'm coming at it from the perspective of what I enjoy and what I like reading. If you're trying to sell a script, then, that's something that's completely out of my wheelhouse. Story structure might be incredibly important for that. So I just want to clarify that so that, my advice is coming from what I find interesting or what I enjoy reading and more from a storytelling perspective and the marketability of a script or, selling it.
I'll give just a slightly different take on this. And this is especially for people who are just starting out when it comes to, especially because, we generally we only do horror scripts here. If you're concerned about act structure and you're trying to work everything into the absolute perfect act structure, don't worry about it in 6 weeks. Like that's hard to do in 6 weeks. If you want to worry about act structure, think of it as like you want to make sure your script escalates. You don't want to blow your biggest moments early. You want to make sure that the script has a steady or severe escalation throughout, because horror is always just ratcheting up the tension or ratcheting up the stakes. So if you're worried about structure a lot and you don't think you have enough time to work on it, just make sure that when you're doing your script, it escalates in a way that feels natural and it doesn't have huge peaks or
Absolutely.
valleys throughout. And then that will keep your script interesting from start to finish, especially if you're new, you don't quite have the technical skills down. But if you are like progressively making the tension higher, I'm still going to like it, even if, like your formatting is not 100%, or your character descriptions are weird, or your action's a bit off. That can be forgiven if the story itself just works in a natural way.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to say on that.
That's why Chinatown is taught as like the best screenplay ever, because it's not like it's the best dialogue ever, or it's like the most iconic bits. It's just a very solid, no fat story. That's why Chinatown is taught. For me, Quantum of Solace is one of the most embarrassing major blockbuster films ever, because that was made during the writer's strike. And you can tell they just looked at Chinatown. They typed in best screenplays ever, because there's no writers around. They said Chinatown. They're like, okay, what if the Bond villain wants water? And they just copied the plots, and it's not good because what, John talked about with the escalation, it's not there. It doesn't work. Like, you can't copy Chinatown, which is, this detective investigating water in LA, and carry it over to a big Bond action film. It doesn't work like that, even if you make the sets bigger. So you have to have a natural form of escalation, which is the most important thing, regardless of however your structure is.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. We have 3 more questions. One is, 2 of them are 2-part questions. Let's just rock them out. We're hitting about an hour and 20 minutes now.
Gotcha.
So first question is from Pans from Trans Am. It's first part. What was the film you watched that made you want to be a screenwriter? And the second question, to paraphrase, is how do you deal with self-doubt and insecurities when you're writing?
Well, I can answer this one. It was actually not my idea. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was something with Nicole Kidman, and it was some sort of thriller. And then in the end, apparently it turned out to be aliens. It's something. And my buddy walked out, and he's like, "I've read some of your other writing." He's like, "You could have wrote a better movie than that in 2 weeks." And that was the first time in my life it ever occurred to me, hey, why don't you even think about trying this? And I didn't stick with it. I didn't really look at format. I didn't research anything, but it kind of kicked around in my head. You know what? You've seen things where you're like, how did this get made? Why don't you at least try? And that was the impetus. In terms of self-doubt, it never goes away. Everyone that I know that's a writer that I respect or looked up to is just doing their best to limp across the finish line and not just give up all the time. And I think that's what makes you great, because the worst writers I know in the world are confident, and they're convinced that what they have is just so awesome that it's just going to change the world. And everyone else I know is just trying to do their best to not look like a fool.
Yeah. Maybe Spider-Man or E.T. for me, because I can just remember being, 7 or 8, and just making my own home films, which are just Spider-Man versus E.T. And it's, and I just
won?
Spider-Man, but E.T. could come back from the dead. So that was
Okay,
kind
yeah.
of, we got, it was a typical versus film. They team up at the end. So no.
Was it better than Batman versus Superman?
It was definitely better. I don't know what happened to those, but I mean, if I can find those films, they're going up online.
There we go.
I mean, obviously, Spider-Man and E.T. are going to get along, but because I saw films and I was inspired by them, and I'm a 7 or 8 year old, and I say I can do that too, and I just take out my Spider-Man action figure and my E.T. dude who has the light up finger, and because you see stories told, you want to see stories told by you. That's the most inspiring thing about that. I mean, Spielberg, who made E.T., he would hear his dad's stories about World War II, and he would take a camera, he'd go outside, and he would pretend he was in World War II. And later he made Saving Private Ryan. You see what a progression that is. You can go look at his childhood, movies that he made that were just the simplest thing. That's just him wearing a, soldier hat saying, here I am storming the beach. And then years later, he makes the definitive film about Normandy and D-Day. And so there's such a genesis for as a storyteller, where we find these certain points. So the point I'm making is that Spider-Man versus ET is coming, and it's going to be a while now, but it's that you have these certain things in your life which are going to inspire you. And from the very beginning, I knew that films were important to me, and that they were the storytelling art form that I enjoy the most.
I'd say the first movie that I watched that made me decide I wanted to write, it happened, like almost 12 years before I actually did start writing. But it was Ryuhei Kitamura's first film, Versus. It was like, okay, we got samurais, we got ninjas, we got zombies, we got gangsters. What else do you want? And I was like, this is cool. And then it was like, it was shot for like $20,000. I was like, okay, that's super cool. I could potentially do that one day. I should write. And then 12 years later, I actually started. So that happens sometimes. And when it comes to self-doubt, I would say, like Brute said, it never really goes away. You just got to kind of push through it. And if all the best writers I know they're never, what's the word I'm looking for? They're never really full of themselves. Like everybody's trying like you said, everybody's trying their best to do their best work, and they're always second guessing, and they're always trying to make themselves better, because you'll never truly be, like the objective best. All you can be is the best version of you. And then the only way to do that is to get better each time you do it.
Self-doubt's fine, but you got to be at the keyboard. Like self-doubt is not good if you've walked away, but if you just say like, I don't know, but your hands, your fingers are over the keys and you're just thinking about it, that's fine as you're writing, but you've got to be there. You've got to dedicate yourself to it. It's like, you've got to put yourself in those situations, and not say, I let it pass me by. You can't look back and say, oh, if only I had written that screenplay, because you can always write that screenplay. The keyboard's not going to go away. So it's in your hands if you want to write, and also in your head. I guess it's a better analogy.
Yeah, I would say that it wasn't a movie that got me into screenwriting. It was actually back in grade 9 in high school. Me and some friends filmed a movie basically just to, roast our other friend. And so, we did that, and I think we filmed for 3 days, and it was like it's one of the most fun experiences I had in my life. And from that point on, I was like, yeah, like I like filmmaking, I want to, start making my own movies. It was like a great experience. And so that's kind of what got me into screenwriting. And I would say in terms of self-doubt, I think it's one of those things, as a writer, you have to try to separate your ego and put aside that your writing is not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on your capability. If you've just started out writing, your writing is going to be a bit rusty. It's a skill like anything else. And if you put in enough time, you can develop that skill. I used to go to writers groups, not just for screenwriting, but for writing like stories and fiction. And you would have the problem there where people would bring in their stories and they read it. And when you open up the floor for feedback, they're arguing against anything anybody says. And I feel like
little bastard. No peace. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah, it feels so. I feel like it's, people are taking it personally. Their feelings are hurt. You kind of have to put that aside. It's not a reflection of you. It's your, it's a skill like anything else. Like you're not going to feel bad if you're trying to learn how to, bicycle for the first time, and it's taking you a little bit to stay on top of the bicycle. But I think because it's writing and it's so personal and it's our own views and it's an expression of ourselves, you can let those doubts creep in. So I think you just kind of have to push past that.
Perfect. Corrigan agrees, by the way.
So do we have 2 more questions? We got like 5 minutes, so it hits 1:30. I think 1:30 would be the good stopping point.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
All right, running into it. Samaid, however you pronounce that, please let me know in the Discord, because I probably look like a dumbass. What's the one thing you always notice when you read a script, and what did that change about your writing? I'll start us off. I'll give a quick answer since we're trying to wrap up here. The first thing I always notice with a script is whether it hits a certain tone. If it keeps that tone, and whether the action lines are overwritten or not. Overwritten action lines tend to take me out of a script very quickly. And if the tone abruptly shifts with no particular reason plot-wise, that also seems to bother me. And what did that change about my writing? It always makes me look at my scripts and make sure that I am always on the same page with myself and my plot, and that everything is going in concert and staying coherent.
I'd say white space. White space is the space between your lines, and making sure you don't have large unbroken monologues or unbroken paragraphs. And that's one of the things that when you start getting read by other people, they will miss pieces of what you wrote because it's all in a chunk. And then you'll start getting notes and you'll be like, that's in there. Well, they missed it. You didn't have white space. So that's one of the things I notice now.
I notice if I would like that writer, like if they seem like a cool person. And that's not like there's scripts that are so messed up, and very hard R, and you can read him like, this guy's fun, even it's just like cannibals, killing people, and you're like, oh, he probably cool to have a beer with. And you can just like, personality definitely shows even after several scripts, like especially after several scripts, you're able to figure out someone's personality. So for me, the good writers, you can read their scripts and you're able to tell, like, I bet this person's cool. Like, I bet that's the biggest problem. A lot of, when you read some screenplays for major Hollywood blockbusters, you're like, this is dry and lifeless. Was this written by a person? Like, it's just like, you can tell that like this was written by 9 people, that it was just taken and just ripped apart and turned into a corporate thing. So that's the biggest story for me, is seeing personality and like, like your history, love, that you're able to pull from that. I'm able to see that, you are able to create stories based on, that love. And I can see that personality in your scripts. So that's some sample that.
I would say formatting is the first thing I see. And it's one of those things, before you even read the first line, you already know if it's formatted correctly or not. And I think that's why you really have to nail down your formatting, because even if you told an amazing story and you've got an amazing script, people are going to judge your screenplay based on whether you formatted it correctly.
Last question is actually 3-part question from Layden.
Okay, go ahead.
We're going to do it quick as we can. Part 1, how do you keep your enthusiasm high while writing a script? What do you do to challenge yourself as a writer, and what goals do you present to yourself, and what's the best way to accomplish them? That's actually 4 questions, Layden. Okay, so to keep my enthusiasm high, I write something I want to watch. We've been over that a bunch of times. I'm not going to go over it again. How do you challenge yourself as a writer? Do plenty of research, put your research. But the thing about doing research is, if you do really great research, but it's not noticeable, but nobody's taken out by it, then you've probably done your job, because sitting there and writing like dictionary definition lines of the things you're trying to do is like impossible to read.
I feel attacked.
You don't do it so bad. I've seen it.
I have to edit it out. That's
yeah, there you go. It's fine. Like, you put it on there at first and you go, okay, now I feel good about it. Now we could just delete that and move on. All right. How do you challenge yourself as a writer? Try to write something different each time. Don't always try to lean back on the same tropes, same ideas, same tone, stuff like that. Do something different. What goals do you present to yourself, and what's the best way to accomplish them? The goal is just always become a better writer. And how do you accomplish it? By writing. There.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but shortest answer for me, just I write, like by writing, you are challenging yourself. You are, taking time out of your day to create a unique story. And, any variation of writing you do is going to improve yourself. So just simplest that it can be, you write and you get better.
I look at it almost as archaeology. I outline, I research, but none of those outlines ever worked once I started. There you go.
On camera. Where?
There you go.
Dog.
We got another pup. None of my outlines have ever held up past the first 30 pages, because I realize the character is making their own decisions. And so that engages me, because I feel like I'm not writing. I feel like I'm revealing something that's beyond me. So that keeps me engaged.
So I would say, how do I keep my enthusiasm high? Kind of like Astro was saying, write something that you feel very passionate about and that you want to see as a film. What do I do to challenge myself as a writer? Never write something you've already written. And I don't mean that literally, but if you wrote, a specific type of horror comedy, move on to something different for the next script. And then what goals do you present to yourself, and what's the best way to accomplish them? I'd say the same answer that I just gave for the previous question. Always try and write something new and push yourself as a writer, and that's how you're going to grow as a writer.
Beautiful.
All right. I think that's the first roundtable, and I think it was a smashing success.
We'll know in the sub. When they flame us, I'll know.
When Lee Childs and Stephen King and Chris Stuckman join the sub, I'm not going to be popular.
What?
What? All right. Well, we'll call it there. And this is going to happen more regularly in the sub. We're going to update y'all on what the procedure for that will be. It won't all be mods. It will be guests, and we will set that up for you. So I'm very excited to see how this experience grows. So until then.
Yep.